It has to be poetic or something that after 941 days, Klay's first game back is against the Cavs. Man, we are in different times. We clearly are in different times. The last 2.5 years have felt like a decade, but we are still here. But something is different. This is not the same NBA. This NBA is very different. Draymond said it best. Klay isn't coming back to the same NBA he left, and I think that's what I want to talk about today. Here are the 11 things that have changed since Klay's been back. The biggest changes since Klay's been gone. And 11 because it's Klay. Before I start this off, I want to say you should go ahead, like, subscribe, do the whole YouTube thing, okay? Like, just do all that YouTube stuff, and let's get started. Let's talk about a player that has changed 2 franchises in the span of 1 decision, and that the NBA AI superstar himself, Kawhi Leonard. In his lone year in Toronto, he helped to lead the franchise to its first NBA championship, like 20 minutes after Klay got injured. And then on top of that, the last game in Oracle Arena before they moved off to the Chase Center. Double pressure. The NBA community sat and waited as Kawhi, showing the emotions of a ham and cheese sandwich, was a big name amongst a sea of big names. We thought he could stay and run it back in Toronto and honestly possibly win in a very open Eastern Conference, or he could join the Super Clique and go off to the Lakers with LeBron and AD wearing that LA gold. However, he chose the Clippers, which is like not choosing your drunk friend who has all the money, has the bitches, and you always end up in the suburbs, even though it's always a chaotic time, and instead just choosing your homie who just gets drunk and it's just always chaos. But Kawhi wasn't done yet, because in OKC, after Damian Lillard buried the Westbrook era of OKC basketball, like they literally drugged their asses out, Paul George found his new home and pretty much strong-armed his way to the Clippers, creating a super duo in a league that was increasingly becoming more super duo-y over big threes. Basically all but forcing Westbrook to leave OKC for maybe not so green pastures. The Raptors have been up and down, having to fill a Kawhi-sized hole in a rotation. Pascal's been good. He was supposed to be that guy, but he maybe isn't the guy that you build a team around, and he's not really as young as you think he is. And Fred VanVleet, who really should be an all-star right now, like how does Fred VanVleet have less votes than Kyrie? Oh, this is why we can't have nice things. They still have good coaching. They still have a good base, but this isn't We the North anymore. This is more like We the... On the other hand, OKC has so many picks that they have 15 chances to recreate any big three in NBA history they want. They, outside of Shea and Giddy, their picks are more valuable than their players. The Clippers have been fine. They've had some good breaks. They've had some unlucky breaks in the bad case of Kawhi's knee and a bad case of Jokic and Murray. But a championship is in their future. Like they seem like a team that will figure it out at some point, but they're not the Kings of LA. At least not yet, because a certain somebody has taken that crown. Lakers win a championship, LeBron's one step closer. Make no mistake about it, when Klay got hurt in the finals and that was his last game for over 2.5 years, there was not a sight that the Lakers would win another championship. We didn't think LeBron would win another championship. LeBron was at home while Klay was in the finals, which was the first time since 2005. Although LeBron could take practically anybody to an NBA Finals, that's kind of his charm. He's the system, the player, and shit, the coach and front office all for the price of one hairline. It was not a guarantee that the Lakers were going to win another championship. So in October of 2020, he wins a championship at Disneyland in front of live streaming fans on an LED board. Was definitely not in the cards in 2019. We will get to the whole, pandemic stuff. The Lakers went on a run, and LeBron and AD are almost the perfect duo for each other. They kind of complement each other perfectly. But deeper than that, adding another championship and another Finals MVP with the appeal of LA. On top of that, LeBron has a stone cold Steve Austin middle finger to the concept of aging and time. Because he's a man that currently right now is scoring at a rate that if he finishes his season at this rate, he's scoring at a rate that's fourth best of his entire career right now and has the fourth best true shooting percentage of his entire career right now. And this is a 37-year-old man. First of all, the Lakers are kind of bitches for letting him do this, but he's doing this all while playing the center position. This means that even though all the Lakers struggles, all the Lakers problems, they could still win a championship out of all this. And LeBron could add another championship, another finals MVP to his very stacked resume, putting him one step closer to you-know-who. Let's also talk about the NBA's youth movement picking up steam. When Klay made his return, there was a new set of players making their way up the NBA hierarchy. He already faced a couple of them. We know about Luka, who's arguably one of the best young players the NBA has ever seen. He's pretty much what would happen if like a kid who wore a shirt at the pool knew how to do mean crossovers and step backs, with his tall friend Kristaps, who's been pretty good himself. However, Devin Booker made a whole ass finals and was doing basketball charades of Kobe, giving out master classes to the Bucks whether they paid for it or not. Jokic and Embiid are competing for the best big man in basketball award. Karl Anthony Towns is just being himself, so being great. Donovan Mitchell and De'Aaron Fox have become reliable stars in their small markets, giving new hope to those small markets, but in the case for both of them, not for long. Shai Gilgeous is becoming an incredible basketball player and dressing better than the guy that your girl told you not to be worried about. Brandon Ingram is summoning his inner KD every fucking year. Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, and OG Anunoby have made sure Toronto doesn't fold without Kawhi Leonard. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are on the same team, but have been competing for the best wing scorer in the league. And while Zach LaVine has become the new score-all guard for a team that has not had that athletic score-all guard since a certain somebody 10 years ago. And I know I don't really want to mention guys that like were drafted or were just getting drafted or drafted in around the time that Klay was out, but like you can't talk about the new pillars of the youth movement in the NBA without talking about Ja Morant, who's primed to be the best point guard in the NBA. Zion Williamson, who's pretty much Charles Barkley with a jetpack. Tyler Hero, who will make an all-star team at some point. LaMelo Ball rejuvenating the Hornets, and Anthony Edwards doing the same for Minnesota. Sacramento basically fucked around and got a game-changing potential all-star point guard by accident in Haliburton. How did Phoenix not get him? Shit, even this year's rookie class seems like there's going to be 4 all-stars at some point in their careers. In 2019, some of the draft classes were mid, not because the players were bad, but because they were still kind of getting into themselves. Now, they are coming into their own, with one player who's benefited the most out of all of this. Is Trae Young the most popular athlete to play in Atlanta, maybe of all time? I don't know, because he has steep competition. People really love Michael Vick. Klay got hurt. Trae Young was coming off his rookie year, where he played well, but you had a lot of questions about his game and his long-term stability in the NBA, being like on the upper echelon of guards, maybe not even really getting to that upper echelon. Those questions are past tense now. He's became a top 5 point guard. He puts ridiculous stats. All his stats have significantly boosted up, and he's led the Hawks to the Eastern Conference Finals in 2021. And possibly, if it wasn't for a referee's foot, Trae Young could have made the NBA Finals, and possibly had the Hawks winning. But when Klay last played, we all laughed at the idea of Trae even being in the same conversation with Luka. But now, even though most people, and I would say this as myself, that Luka is better than Trae Young, that gap has drastically closed. And speaking of young players just making a new way for themselves, the new All-Star picture has been insane. During the time Klay's been out, there have been 15 new All-Stars since summer of 2019. Some of these players are a bit older and have reached their peak or just got lucky, like Mike Conley, who's been in the NBA since 2007, or Rudy Gobert and Julius Randle, who've been in the NBA since 2014. And some players are the future, like Zion, Trae, Luka, Tatum, Booker, Donovan, and even guys like Levine and Brown, who are still only 26 and 25 respectively. The scary thing is there's even more players waiting in the wings. Speaking of new parity in the All-Star game, there's new parity when it comes to the NBA title picture, because I think this has been low-key the biggest change since Klay's been away. When Klay last played, he was in the finals, and the last time a team in the finals that didn't include LeBron, Curry, Thompson, or Green, you would have to go all the way back to 2010 with the Lakers versus Celtics. But the last 2 years has been an extra sprinkle of what we predicted was totally different from the outcome that came. I just mentioned the Lakers, but the Heat haven't made a final since 2014, and they fucked around and made it in 2020, pretty much propelling Jimmy Butler to be like the real disruptor to any goals of any of the established top contenders, like being the NBA's version of a Money in the Bank briefcase. In 2021, the Bucks made the finals for the first time since 1971, when Kareem and Oscar were leading them, and the Suns made their first finals since 1993. We're in mental times to be an NBA fan, but possibly the most interesting times, because anybody could win it. Like, the NBA is wide open right now, and any combination of the Nets, Bucks, Lakers, Warriors, Bulls, Heat, Suns, Jazz, shit, maybe even the Clippers could make a finals appearance in the next 1 to 2 years. And that's the thing, when Klay last played, we were all talking about how parity wasn't a thing anymore in the NBA. Now, we got that. A lot of it. But, okay, we have it now. Okay, scratch that. We have it now. But, the Nets had something to say about that, because back in the summer 2019, KD and Kyrie decided to leave their respective teams to join forces in Brooklyn. That's enough to change the tide regardless of any situation. KD was leaving the Warriors for legacy and Achilles related reasons, while Kyrie was leaving Boston for Kyrie related reasons. But we had to wait for the Magic, as KD was still recovering from his Achilles injuries. So the 2020 season was kind of a write-off. The 2021 season, however, Kyrie was in and out of the lineup for just sometimes random reasons, and the Nets front office pulled the Jinzo card and summoned James Harden to this equation, making OP to actually unfair. I just made a video about James Harden, shameless plug. In reality, if it wasn't for a Kyrie injury and KD having the feet of a 7-foot penguin, it was a guarantee that Nets would be 2021 champions. However, although it's still very possible that this team could win it all, it's a lot harder. Those steps are not as clear, because Harden is considerably a less player, even though he's finding his groove now, and Kyrie is kind of just volunteering for the team at this point, only playing in half the games in half the season. But although having KD, Kyrie, and Harden all together is never a bad thing, even if it's part-time or not, it makes him a very weird outlier in the cases of big threes not working out or potentially not working out. And speaking of things that have not worked out so far, it is baffling that Westbrook is kind of all over the place since 2019. So remember, when a certain Hooper rapper kind of blew his whole spot up and PG skipped town to play for a new tag team partner, Russ was sent to the Houston Rockets to play with Harden, and the trade that involved, we will get to CP3. It was interesting to see one very ball-dominant player play with another very ball-dominant player. Now, it worked to a point. They experimented with Warriors small ball, but skipping over the feeling out process and the versatility and going straight to chaos. But after an even more embarrassing 2020 playoff run, he was traded again to Washington for an even more ball-dominant and sometimes unreliable John Wall, and who hadn't played a game for over a year, with a contract that's even crazier than Westbrook. So say whatever you want about Westbrook, at least he's playing. Westbrook was bad, then he was stellar. Like, Westbrook's really the only player that could have a 21 point, 15 assists, 14 rebounds, like shoot 30% from the field, even worse from three, but like still be a positive for a team. Westbrook became the triple-double king that year, but after a pretty expected playoff loss to the Sixers, he was traded again to the Lakers, which is right now working like what happens if you have firecrackers, but instead of blowing them at the park, you blew them inside your house. It's super mind-boggling that a guy that can make 25, 10, and 10 look easy is now a liability. Someone who has not been taken seriously since Klay's been injured. Somebody who right now who went from still being like considered a top 5 point guard to now being overshadowed by some of the young guys who just got drafted. It's incredible that his athleticism and versatility is Westbrook's yin to his decision-making yang. He's a Hall of Famer that's essentially untradeable right now. Unlike Chris Paul, who is in that trade, who's aged like fine wine, who is probably the biggest representation of why we should all probably go vegan. Chris Paul was traded to OKC and was seen as kind of like the end of Chris Paul's career. He was going to age gracefully, put up some good stats here or there, put up some good games here or there, but it was no longer going to be like taken seriously as a real threat to a playoff run or to a damn sure championship after years and years and years of just being so close and so close. And it's so baffling, it's so damn funny that you have to almost laugh so you don't cry, that one of the most decorated point guards is always kept away from the upper echelon of accolades. However, going to OKC was the best thing that ever happened to his career. He pretty much reinvented himself with all his favorite sons, including Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. This was supposed to be a nothing year for OKC in a bloated West, but instead saw CP3 become an all-star again, help lead the Thunder to the playoffs, and it wasn't for, out of all things, a James Harden game-winning block, CP3 would have probably went to the second round to get beat by the Lakers, but thought that counts. CP3 was back. This wasn't a retirement tour, which makes all this more wild, as now a searching 35-year-old on a very expensive contract that may come back to bite the Suns in the ass was traded to the Suns to play with a 24-year-old Devin Booker and a 22-year-old DeAndre Ayton, and has worked so well that they finished as the number 2 seed. But still, although they were still not taking a title contenders, it was still great to see this, that CP3, even though he was never going to win the MVP, was getting those debates again, which literally makes this all the more insane that at game 1 of the NBA playoffs, he goes down with an injury, and by the time he gets to the finals is so banged up, and it's so damn cruel, and it's so funny, it's so cruel, and it's so funny. What does God have against Cliff Paul's brother? But and all this has basically led him to still be ringless in the closest he's ever been to a championship. But he is close to a championship still. After all these years, a guy who made his NBA debut in 2005 is still here. He's still one of the best point guards in the league. He's still playing at an all-star level, still impacting winning. And the rest of this list is a little somber from here, so let's just get into it. Kobe. That happened. Sometimes you just don't feel like playing ball today. On January 26th, Kobe Bryant, along with 8 others, including his 13-year-old daughter, Gianna, were killed in a helicopter accident on their way to Gianna's basketball game. The world collectively froze when the TMZ post came out on that very gloomy Sunday. Everyone felt every emotion: sadness, despair, confusion, anger. For many people, the first time they ever truly cared or even cried about a celebrity that they never really never met before. It was a gut punch to the sports community, but it left the NBA and basketball community face down, motionless. It was the worst feeling. Honestly, one of the worst days to be a basketball fan, because basketball was no longer a distraction, but it was a reminder of what had happened, what has transpired, and who's not here anymore. What made this more sad was that, it was so sudden, it was so brief, and it felt like just because we were literally talking about the man the day before. Not even the day before, 12 hours before, we were talking about him, and it felt so cruel that now he was just gone like that, like out of nowhere. But in this time of a nightmare, some beautiful things came out. We saw many different forms of tributes at the Grammys, Pro Bowl, NHL games, soccer games, the Royal Rumble. Just many people paying their respects to somebody who transcended sports, which also another reason why this was so hard for many people was because Kobe really didn't have to represent basketball to you. Like, the Mamba mentality was just a concept of hard work at the end of the day, packaged for Kobe's brand, but many people took it to apply to their own lives, which is what made this really tough. And then there was still basketball. You know, outside of all the beautiful murals that were being made and people looking out for each other and people and Staples Center becoming a mourning site, basketball still needed to be played. College games were going on and players finding out mid-game or even after the game that Kobe had passed away. But then the Spurs-Raptors, the first NBA game that played since the news broke, and for many players who honestly should have been playing that day, they let the shot clock run out on the first possession, and then every other team followed suit, including beautiful scene from MSG, Trae Young wearing number 8 for only a day, for that one day only, and Andrew Wiggins putting the ball at the free throw line where Kobe broke his last scoring record. The entire NBA, from players to coaches, wearing Kobe's, bringing them back into the mainstream, vowing to wear that all season. We saw high school players dedicating games to Kobe, changing their number for that one day to number 8 or number 24. It's so crazy that Kobe's jersey number is so key to basketball. It's literally a fundamental rule about basketball. But now all eyes were on the Lakers, because they were supposed to play on the day after the accident, but the game got postponed, which at the time was very rare. That only ever really happened for tragedies. Now all eyes were on them. That Friday, when the Lakers played, it felt like a funeral. The entire arena was wearing Kobe jerseys. His jersey numbers being put on the court. The seats where Kobe and Gianna played were left empty. Usher performing. The entire team wearing Kobe sneakers, and the entire team being introduced from Lower Merion High School, number 24. And then there was LeBron, him throwing his prepared speech on the ground and just speaking from his heart, was seeing an old friend, old rival, former teammate on the international stage, being the leader that the Lakers community needed and the city of LA needed at that time, and the basketball community needed, because Kobe was just as much as synonymous with basketball and the NBA, he was synonymous of just what it was like to be, I'm assuming what it was like to be an LA citizen. Kobe influenced LA as much as LA influenced Kobe. Even if you've never been to Los Angeles, you probably knew one thing about Los Angeles, is that's the city Kobe Bryant played in. This was so important because this was during a time where his teammates and fans and across the NBA spectrum and many people around the world were holding back tears, and probably LeBron was holding them back himself, but he had to be the leader because many people were too depressed to lead themselves. The last message Kobe ever had publicly was him speaking and celebrating LeBron. With that public display of celebration, it was almost being the last thing publicly of Kobe Bryant. It was almost like it was just as much as a goodbye as to what needs to be done now. That was the underlying energy for the rest of the season, and that was, keep in mind, not going perfectly for the Lakers. However, the perfect goodbye came at the All-Star weekend in Chicago and the changes to the All-Star game. The NBA announced that the All-Star game would be changed from 3 quarters, and then the last quarter would be if I'm saying these rules correctly, it would be adding 24 points to the team that was already leading it, and then you had to get to that point total with no time limit. And the All-Star Game trophy being named after Kobe, which is pretty cool because Kobe represented the showmanship kind of flash of basketball that we all love so much and why we became fans in the first place. And that game, even though the rules were hard to explain, the game was not hard to explain, because that was one of the 2020 All-Star game. 2020 All-Star weekend was really just a celebration of Kobe Bryant, but it was beautiful. That 2020 All-Star game was one of the best games, arguably ever, of any All-Star game previously, because it was so much energy. It brought so much passion. Players were competitive as hell. Those last few minutes were beautiful. We saw all the best highlights. We saw all the best kind of games within the game. And that's what the All-Star game usually represents. The best of the best playing this very fun game of pickup. And ending with one of the most Mamba players, Kawhi Leonard, winning the All-Star game MVP. As just a standalone game, it was a good night of basketball. But as a goodbye, a love letter to Kobe Bryant, it meant everything. And well, that leads to what we know now, because this was the last big moment in the NBA to what we now know, the timeline that we are currently in, COVID. Back in 2019, we weren't afraid of catching a disease that has taken the lives of 6 million people around the world. We were more afraid of catching James Harden's foul baiting. Basketball, like many sports, functions as an escape. The world is cruel with many ways, and with many ways we have to question the system we live in and sometimes tolerate out of fear, insecurity, hardship. And if we can sit for a few hours a day and not worry about the world around us and just rooting for your favorite city or your favorite team or your favorite player, then sports did its job. However, even sports couldn't run from the pandemic, NBA being one of the hardest hit leagues due to COVID, in some ways more than one, changing the outcome of history and potentially for years to come, and changing players' families for years to come. Many NBA moments were done inside a bubble, a time period that was iconic, but also a reminder of that one of the biggest things that makes sports, the fans, and that was just a constant reminder that seeing those LED boards and seeing Disneyland was a constant elephant that COVID has made the NBA seem less spectacular than what's usually represented as. That's maybe why we don't see too many highlights of the bubble anymore. A very remarkable and memorable moment that's tainted by a virus, by a pandemic, that made it not seem normal. And honestly, we don't know the future. The virus has changed so much of how we interact with basketball. It's changed the lives from fans to players in sometimes more devastating ways than others. But when Klay stepped on the floor after 941 days, him hitting threes with Steph seemed normal. That's why this moment was such an event. That Sunday was an event. We can talk about X and the O's. We can talk about how Klay's gonna fit in now in this new NBA, because Klay's been away for a very long time and he's coming back from two of the worst injuries that any athlete could get. But seeing him with Steph, Dre, Looney, and Iguodala, like the only 4 players that are familiar from the 2019 roster, and seeing him just be on the court again, that is pretty normal. And that makes me happy. And it probably makes you happy as well. Thanks for watching.